we're going to move on into starting to think about the more detailed aspects of this network and how we can use the vast and complementary skill sets within the people here and across the wider network to develop these new ideas for how we can think about health-centered ventilation design and the breathing city approach. So we're going to go through some detail about the different themes, and then we've got a session using a breakout rooms technology. Just as a reminder, please keep yourself on mute throughout, and please, if you've got questions, post them in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Martin, and Martin's going to tell us about theme 1, which is about coupled indoor and outdoor environments.
All right, thank you, Kath. Let me see if I can share my screen. Right, is it on the presentation mode?
Yes, that's right. We're in.
Great, excellent. All right. Hello, everybody. So Malcolm Cook and I are leading theme 1, which is on coupled indoor-outdoor environments. The aims of this theme is really to identify all mechanisms for ingress and egress of pollutants in buildings. So it's both the pollutants themselves, which are coming in, which are going out, and how do we quantify the exchange across building facades, and to assess the tools and techniques for quantifying this air exchange. So both in terms of modeling, in terms of measurement techniques, in terms of data collection, and so on. And as we heard this morning, it's a vast challenge just because of all the kind of competing and reinforcing interactions between all different elements that make up air quality. So on one side, we've got the pollutants, and they infiltrate into a building, they exfiltrate into a building, then all kinds of stuff happens to them. So you might have chemical reactions, formations, they might deposit on the floor, and so on. They obviously they interact with HVAC systems and filtration systems. And really what is core to our network is the flow, because the flow obviously determines where material pollutants go, and both indoor and outdoor flows can be incredibly heterogeneous. So if you look at indoor flows, you can have vastly different ventilation strategies and flow patterns inside your room depending on how it's connected and what else is happening. So you've got the HVAC systems, air conditioning, vents, and so on, and they modify your space. And then, of course, you've got human intervention. So humans like to be in control of things and to regulate their space. They've got behaviors, patterns, and these modify flow and therefore also the amount of pollutants you're exposed to. So you can think of opening windows, but also what do people do during the day? How much time do they spend in different rooms? How much time do they spend outside? And so on. So, and that's ultimately what leads to personal exposure. And from personal exposure, you've got the health implications. Right. So in terms of the indoor and outdoor exchange, which is really what this network focuses about, I just like to draw on this kind of wonderful piece of work by Hannah Gauff, and also involved are Kath Noakes and Janet Barlow. So it's from within the UK, which is this Silso cube, and I think many of you will have heard about this. So it's this big cube which was situated in the rural environment, and just to put it into perspective here, this is a car here. So this is a full-scale facility The Silso cube was on its own, but in the heydays of its life, during the Refresh project, there was this array of blocks made of hay bales, which was put around it to just study what happens if you place a block like this in an urban-like environment. And critical to ventilation is always the pressure coefficient. So I've pulled this out. There's lots of work on this cube, and I'm just mentioning the reference below here. So if you look at the theta is 0, that means that the wind is going head on onto the cube, and then you've got all wind orientations, and these were kind of long-term measurements. So this is the cube on its own. This is the cube in an environment, and the only thing that I'm going to talk about here is just the black points and the gray points, which are the wind tunnel, the full-scale measurements, and then the dashed black line, which is here the ASHRAE guidelines. So what is clear is that for this single cube, you could argue it's reasonably well, right? So the CP tend to be a little bit higher, you know, but in general they follow it reasonably well. For the backwards, if the flow comes from the other side, the pressure coefficient isn't quite as negative, but overall it follows it reasonably well. And this is what happens when you put obstacles around. And what is striking about this figure here is just that regularly the sign isn't even right. Yeah, so this say the CP for this -90 wind direction is positive, whereas the SIPSI urban guideline says it's negative. Yeah, so you don't even get the direction of the flow right. So this kind of illustrates some of the challenges that you're faced when you place a building in an urban environment. So, and this is, I think, one of the unique challenges that we face here. So the building is unique in itself. That's one of the unique things about buildings, that every building is different. And then also the environment of each building is different. So we need a really to improve our understanding of this exchange. So what is the plan? Well, so in theme 1, we plan to do 3 co-creation workshops from and with a really multidisciplinary kind of team. So practitioners, policymakers, regulators, and researchers, because we want to understand this problem, well, as in a system manner. We plan to draft a position paper which presents the issues of concern, the current state of the art, and opportunities in the simulation, and also, of course, the measurement of coupled indoor-outdoor environments. Right, and ultimately, we hope that this would lead to the development of a roadmap in collaboration with other themes. So finally, Kath already mentioned this earlier, there will be some small-scale funding available to pump prime some research activities, and we will kind of update later in the spring about how you can apply to these and so on. So some of the questions that we like to address is, firstly, what are the technical requirements for models from a health, a ventilation, a design, and a regulatory perspective? And then what models are available, what measurements have been made, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses? So this is really kind of going into the literature and drawing onto the knowledge of the network to figure these out. Then think about human behavior, which is obviously a very important aspect of air quality within flow models, and also behavior, also control, intervention, and so on. And then also to quantify the systematic differences in indoor-outdoor exchange for different building types. Yeah, so You can think in terms of vulnerability groups, hospitals, schools, homes, community centers. And as I already said, every building is unique. So we can categorize building types, but even within those categories, the differences will be massive. And the question is, how do we deal with that? Then there's trade-offs with other requirements, energy, comfort, noise, and so on. Flow, of course, it underlies many processes. And therefore, if you can say something about air quality, you can probably also, well, you can say also things about energy, comfort, noise, and so on. Then there's opportunities arising from technology advances. You so think of wearable sensors, digital twins. I put this in response to what Paul Monk was talking about this morning, and machine learning techniques, and so on. All right, so just to round off, we plan to set up a working group, which meets regularly, and that will be kind of thinking about how will we run the workshops, how do we frame the problem, and so on. So if you're interested in joining, so please contact either myself or Malcolm Cook, and we'll take it from there. So Malcolm, do you have anything to add here?
No, thank you, Martin. That's nicely covered. I think we'll move on, and we'll look forward to the conversations in the breakout session. Thank you, Martin.
Thanks, Martin, for that. So yeah, a very brief introduction to theme 1, and really thinking about the complexity of how the outdoor flow affects the indoor flow, and how actually we're going to have it's actually being able to characterize both is very challenging. I'm going to move on now to ask Henry to give us a similar introduction to theme 2.
Great. So shout if you can't see the slide. Theme 2 is being led by Abigail Hathaway and myself, and it's all about health. So health means many different things, and quite rightly the WHO take a sort of a broad perspective on health, and that's really a statement of health in the broad context of well-being. But we're here for FUVEN, and the V stands for ventilation. So health in the context of ventilation is really appropriate to take as a primary focus respiratory health. So that's really thinking about how we can help advise the conditioning of indoor environments to minimize respiratory disease. But we very much believe in sort of a holistic approach to ventilation design, and that is because we know that good ventilation design contributes heavily to individuals' well-being in the broadest sense, and good ventilation design contributes to society's well-being through appropriate use of energy, and we currently use a hell of a lot of energy conditioning our indoor environments. So in theme 2, we've set ourselves the aim to try and stimulate innovations, both innovation of knowledge and technology, in order to improve occupant health through better ventilation. And it's really timely in a historical context, in that we spend enormous amounts of our time indoors, and so our exposures there increasingly matter, and our health as occupants is affected by our exposures, but on two very different timescales. So we're affected both by our acute exposures and our chronic exposures. And so if we just think about those short-term exposures, they might, for example, or they do affect airborne infections, and that's especially relevant in the context of COVID-19. But in our theme, we don't only want to focus on acute exposures and COVID-19. We also want to keep in longer term goals and think about chronic exposures. And certain things are affected by both. You know, asthma is a disease that the likelihood of an attack occurring in a given space might be determined by acute exposures, but we know chronic exposures affect the prevalence of the disease within society and individuals. I think it would be remiss not to mention the current pandemic. You know, the Fuven was conceived before the pandemic, but individuals throughout the network have sought to contribute to mitigating its effects, primarily through sort of education and engendering changes in behaviour, and that's right from a sort of national level to advise policy and the like, to, you know, your facilities managers who are on the ground thinking about ventilating complex buildings, to individuals deciding when and which windows to open. I think also the pandemic, we really need to highlight the co-benefits that come with better ventilation motivated by the pandemic, and that will lead to long-term benefits, including you know, thinking about the broad aspects of ventilation, you know, well-being and perhaps improved cognitive function. And we need to accept that, you know, that there's an enormous building stock, and much of it isn't being properly ventilated, and we need to think about retrofitting, not just for the pandemic, but also for the future. And we do need to try to help ventilation be prioritized within the process of building design and construction. So just quickly to think about going, you know, slightly away or broader than the current pandemic, and thinking about health being linked to health in the context of Fuven being linked to our exposures, and what drives those exposures. Occupants are the key. I mean, they're what we're interested in being exposed, but it's really often determined by their activities, their health, their current state of health might affect how comfortable they feel in warm temperatures, and change their behaviours towards ventilation systems and opening and closing of windows, and these sort of interventions have consequences, some of which are intended by the occupants. The very design of the building, unless we're you know, building a new building, which typically we're not, we're often constrained by that and the fabric of the building, and also what's been put inside the building can drive exposures, and we really need to think about both room level solutions and thinking about the building system as a whole as well. Obviously, ventilation, so the supply of outdoor air is a key tool to mitigate exposures, and how we supply that air mechanically or by natural means, so temperature differences and wind forcing can affect exposures. And of course, outdoor air in itself can carry pollutants. The U in FUVN stands for urban, so we're implicitly thinking about urban environments here where outdoor pollutants can be significant. How and where we cool our buildings drives airflow patterns, at least within the room, and very often throughout the whole building, and that determines how comfortable people feel and to the extent to which they intervene, and also determines the energy consumption to a large extent. And then we might choose that it's necessary to clean the air in certain circumstances. And the key thing that I think that this network brings together is a strong expertise in fluid dynamics, and it's really the flow of air that links between all these different aspects of what is a very complex system. We're thinking of starting by developing an evidence base for health linked to exposure, and Sani talked very interestingly about that this morning, and how occupants behave and interface with their systems and environment, and how that impacts health. Crucially, the whole network is really thinking about how the fluid dynamics of air flows outdoors through to indoors and back outdoors again determines occupant exposure and the need for good ventilation design. And there's going to be some small scale research projects called for in that space. But those small scale projects, they're seed corn funding, and we want to help the community co-create research projects to address these massive issues. So far, we've formed a working group, and we're already meeting monthly. The best way to keep abreast of things is to join the FUVN mailing list. If you want to contribute directly to theme 2 by joining our working group, we'd be delighted. Just email me directly, and we'd really appreciate your participation on the XLEAP chat in a number of minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. That's great. So let's now move into theme 3, and I'm going to ask Tim Sharp to give us a very short introduction to theme 3 activities.
Okay, good afternoon. Can you see that okay?
Yep, we've got that.
Okay, right. Thank you, everybody. Right, so theme 3 is how we turn all of this into practice. And there are a number of challenges in that. And if you look at this photograph, you can see what those challenges are. We've got huge numbers of buildings, a lot of which exist already. And if we thought the problem for new buildings was kind of wicked in terms of systems, for existing buildings, it's positively sociopathic. There are a number of kind of big challenges that we have. Clearly, we've been very aware of outdoor air pollution, and that's pretty kind of well evidenced. But in increasing years, there's been more and more things which have looked at that. So we ran a network, health effects of modern airtight construction, which looked at the effects of air tightness, which was picked up in the chat earlier. There was the work I was involved with NICE, and so was Sani and a few other people as well, and the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health report on these things. So there's clearly a lot of context for this. these problems overlap in lots of ways, and there are a number of significant problems. So problems of poor regulation. This thing which was raised this morning, this balance between energy and ventilation is really tricky. You know, so you've got regulations on ventilation, but that's separate from regulations on energy. So that's tricky in itself. Big problems with compliance. You know, huge performance gaps in how we build buildings. This is some tests we did on extract fans in houses. You can see the number of fails there. This is a hole in the wall with a fan. It's really not rocket science, but how we get this stuff right is important. Lack of design skills and tools. Anybody who's sort of who's familiar with the sort of with architects and design will recognize the sort of the blue and green arrow problem in terms of how we think about ventilation and design. Lack of knowledge to inform and help users. The kind of image at the top is from a thing about sort of energy efficiency, and it's telling people to sort of put the draft excluder underneath that gap in the door. That gap in the door is there to enable ventilation. And the other one is telling people not to put things into the drying area because it's causing a nuisance. So what happens? They try and close indoors. And the lack of connection between urban and building scale problems. So, you know, the requirement for ventilation of a building is pretty agnostic as to where it is in terms of ventilation and so on. So these are, you know, these are complex and difficult kind of problems. So the idea of theme 3 is it's got objectives. It's trying to use the knowledge from the network and the expertise to inform a number of things. So policy, planning, regulation, how we sort of put the stuff into law, if you like. How we help and guide designers and clients as well, actually, in terms of, you know, what are the tools we use to actually design things to be kind of better. There'll be a need to engage with the industry and manufacturing and products and services and so on. Information, advice and tools for owners and occupiers, how we talk to people about how things work, what's effective, what people should do in certain situations and so on. And a big part of that in theme 3 is we would like to do some citizen science activities in terms of actually kind of working with people in this. And part of this is also kind of data collection. One of the kind of questions around all of this is, particularly in the built environment and particularly when we come to the application in practice, is did it work? Did it work in real life, and how we do that? There are various kind of things. I mean, you know, how informed policy and regulation is interesting and important. This is a bit of work we did for Scottish building regs, in which we sort of demonstrated that sort of the use of trickle vents wasn't really doing enough in airtight buildings, and therefore it was all terrible. They need to change the regulations. And they said the trouble is we get such big pushback from the industry. You know, no one died, so it's very difficult to make change. And you can see the reality of that in terms of tragic incidents like Grenfell. You know, it takes something really terrible to happen to affect those kind of changes. How we improve design. I mean, airtightness is a really interesting problem. It's obviously been driven by building regulations and energy efficiency, and it's been very effective. Those series of kind of graphs is how buildings have got more and more airtight as we've gone through. And one of the reasons that's been really effective is that we've had good advice on how to do that. And it's also been one of those very few things that is actually tested at completion stage. Most of the regulations the boxes are ticked at design stage. Airtightness is something you have to test. And then what are the tools and techniques for informing and involving building users? You know, there's lots of ideas about sort of about advice and guidance and stuff like that. But I think we probably need to think a little bit more kind of wider about that. I'll also just kind of mention COVID as well, in the sense of illustrating how this can have an effect. So, you know, one of the things is how has the knowledge which has been derived through COVID and the research changed things. So, for example, you know, information, publications, research translates itself into papers which go to things like SAGE. that gets translated into guidance for industry very rapidly. It can also get translated in different ways into information for occupants and people. Fairly good visual information, trying to show things which are not visible to people. And one of the early theme 3 projects is that we want to do a little bit of work on this in terms of asking people. This is probably a good moment actually to ask people about how they are ventilating their homes and what those impacts are. So theme 3 has a number of activities. We are obviously trying to engage and inform users and stakeholders across scale. So it's sort of individual people, householders and so on, to sort of government and industry. So a range of different people that we need to try and A, make contact with, and B, find ways of speaking to as well. So there will be a series of activities which will run over the course of that. We haven't got a programme for these defined yet. Some of these might come out of the next bit of today. But one of them certainly will be, say, some citizen science activities. We want to do things with people, not to people. So what that means is we need to sort of try and define what the mechanisms are going to be for involving people. So there are a series of kind of key questions. Now, I'm not going to read these out now. So these are all questions which are included in the sort of virtual post-it note section which we've coming up. So really, these are a series of questions which are to do with who do we need to engage with across ranges and scales? How do we need to engage them? What do they need to know? And how can we kind of make this work? The important thing to remember in this theme is that this theme is putting things into practice. So it's trying to make some tangible impacts on health for people in buildings. And just to finish on this, people will have heard this phrase, building don't use energy, people do. Well, buildings don't get sick, people do. So it's trying to find some solutions to that. So in the following session from this, a lot of these questions exist on sort of post-it notes. People can add questions. Although there are questions, we probably don't have answers yet. It's trying to think about, as I say, who do we get involved? How do we get them involved? And how can we find some mechanisms to impart the very valuable and advantageous information that this network will provide. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tim. So those are our 3 core themes for the network. Before we jump into the breakout sessions, I'm also going to ask Tongji, who's from Southampton, who's one of our investigators as well, to also just very briefly give a 5-minute presentation on the air quality repositories that we're setting up as part of the programme.
Thank you, Kath. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, good afternoon. So, so this is an open repository. So what we propose here is the first point is a portal for urban outdoor and indoor flow quality data sets and modeling tools. And also with associated publications and highlighted by the systematic reviews. The second point is collecting data across disciplines, crucial for evidence-based guidance. The third one is higher quality benchmark case studies and case database. So Janet Barlow and me are contact person, but we need the member to contribute for this data open repository. We have made something already for you to think in the following discussion. Where it is now, so it's here. Okay, so basically, so this again is one example. Right? So we need a final version following your discussion later on. And so what we think can be useful is we can list all of the data sets below, and you can group this into different, by using different criteria, something like you can think of the methods. Yeah, you can think of the methodologies, right? You can think of the water quantities you are going to document. So following this, we can group into different ways. So one is you can use papers, right? We can come to that point later. So secondly, because we may have different cities, different area, did the field measurements or site experiments or wind tunnel test or whatever. So you can find on the map in the UK, we have 2 cases available at the moment. Also, you can list on papers, right? And so if you are going to contribute, you just need to fill the online form, and this will come to me and Janet directly. We can update the website. So one example, you can see this is a project, I think earlier, Martin just mentioned this project by Kath and Janet Barlow, right? So this one example, you can see we have, this might be a bit too long. So we mentioned the cases and the people involved, and you may have a website already. We point to that. So now you can see this is a integrate collective things here for you start from here to look into this related data sets. So the data and paper here, right? Also, you can see there are many data sets already here. So this gives you some convenience at least, right? We'll also have a few more here, right? So I don't have much to say now. So perhaps, yeah, give another page to show you. So paper is important, is definitely important, and we discuss with people already. So if you have a paper published and you think is related or important, again, fill the form. Ideally, if this paper is have some data sets, can be here. Yeah. So we also think some tools, models, if you want to share, like some MATLAB code or Python codes or these things, and if you can share on here, or you can point to your website, this would be really useful. So, and the map, right, with this can be alive, right? So we have 4 examples here now. You can see one is London, one is near, so this is the cube case, right? I think, yeah, so this is just what I bought. We can update here later. So again, this is just a draft, right? And also it's useful if you have any other data sets available, we can put here. Now you can see we list the one is urban fluid mechanics data portal here. Also the cumulative CFD one is a bigger one. Yeah, can be useful. Also the UK SADA archive, yeah, it's here. Right? And also this can link to the network website, and from there you can be direct to here to this website. I think this is what I want to say. Do come to the if you have a idea or suggestion, come to the following discussion, and Catherine is going to give a short discussion at that point. So I finished.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tom, for that. That's really helpful. So we're now going to move into the interactive part of this, which as with all of these things, there's always an element of lottery at this point in our wonderful world of online workshops. So we are going to move into a breakout session now. Now with the number of people we've got on here, we'd originally hoped to do discussion-based breakouts, but it just is not feasible with typically over 100 people. So what we have done is to create a setting that is interactive but allows you to put your ideas in. So We've got several breakout rooms, 4 of them. The idea of these is to collect feedback and ideas from you as the Breathing City community here. And we want to use these to shape the focus of the themes, shape the network, shape the priorities. And we are hoping that we'll be able to take your thoughts from today, together with everything we've established so far within the network, to create a sort of position type white paper following the event. So we have 4 rooms that we can use. We're using something called XLeap within the environment. So XLeap it's an online environment. It's a little bit like flip charts and post-it notes. So you go in and you can post ideas and comments relating to the themes. It's all done through a text-based type function rather than face-to-face discussion. And each theme area is already pre-populated and has a number of discussion areas. Some it's only 2 or 3, sorry, 3 or 4, but others there's up to about 8 discussion areas where we'd like some input. We'd like you to post things in there, but try not to just give a one-word answer. Try and give a little bit of reasoning as to why you think it's important. So you should have links to the rooms in there, and they should be in the Eventbrite email. Helen has also posted them in the chat for this Zoom. If you're only interested in one area, feel free to just go into that one breakout room. But if you fancy contributing to a couple of the themes, visit as many as you like. Go in, post a few things, have a look what else is there, and click through the different ones in there. You use the link, it will click you over into open a new browser. Please, when you go in, it'll just ask you to enter your name. Just please can you enter your full name so we know who you are. We don't really want anonymous comments in.
Please join the conference.
Oh, just asking me strange things now. There are a number of icons within it. So there's a little navigate icon. You can use this to move between discussion areas. Within, I think, all the themes, we've got a slideshow icon, which will show you a headline slide for the theme. And then click on the deep dive icon and that will get you into the discussion function. There is a chat function in there. There is also a mic function. We're not using those at all. So we'll just use the discussion, but if you want to ask a question, you could always post it in the chat function. This is what it looks like when you get in. So you should get a screen like this, which will have the welcome space, and then you can see a summary and the discussion board. And if you click into the discussion board, this is for theme 1, you would see the different areas. You can click into those, click enter, take you in. If you want to come back out, just use the back function or navigation function. And once you're in, if you click on one of them, for example, this is one of the most important unknowns in indoor-outdoor exchange, you just simply type your comment in here and post it, and those comments, everybody will see them roll through and see them come up. So, you know, if somebody's commented, you could actually comment on their comment if you wanted to. Please be respectful of what other people have written in there. You know, there are a lot of different perspectives in here, a lot of different ideas, and we certainly won't agree on everything, we know that. We're going to jump in there now. We will go straight from the breakout rooms into a break, so you can be flexible over that as you wish. We would like as many suggestions as we can by about 3:15. So our theme leads will go in at about 2:15. Our theme leads will go in at about 2:15 to try and extract a bit of a summary of what's there, so they can report back in the main session at 2:45. So, you know, please take, you know, the next hour to post some things and have a bit of a break as well. We're not going to close the rooms, so we're going to leave them open for a week, because I'm aware that after today, many of you might have ideas, you might mull on things, there might be things you would like to post in there afterwards. So we will collate everything in a week's time. We will remain on the Zoom call. Obviously, if you don't want to stay on, please step off it temporarily or just leave it open in the background. But if anybody does have a question, you can post on the chat in the Zoom and we can help in there as well. And we'll probably we'll return on the Zoom at 2:45. So I hope that makes sense. So head off now, follow the links to the various XLEAP rooms, and start posting some suggestions and ideas for where you would like this network to take us.
My name's Malcolm Cook. I'm one of the co-investigators on the network, and it's my pleasure to chair this afternoon's session, part 3, on first practical steps forward. So welcome back, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for participating so fully in the breakout rooms. There's been some fantastic points raised and some great conversations already started. Thank you very much. And thank you to Helen Freeman in the background, who's been keeping us all in check and making sure all of the tech works. As far as I can see from my end, everything's worked really well. So thank you very much. We've got a great panel discussion lined up for you, starting at 3 o'clock. But just before I introduce our panel, I'd like to ask each of the theme leads to give a brief summary with some feedback of the salient points that were raised in the breakout sessions. So if I could turn first to Martin and theme 1, coupled indoor-outdoor environments. Martin, would you like to take 2 to 3 minutes and try and summarize all of the amazing comments that were raised? You're on mute, Martin. Martin, you're muted.
Is it working?
That's better. Yep. Thank you.
Ah, that's great. That's great. I wasn't able to unmute myself for some reason. Anyway, all sorted. Okay, I can't share my screen. That's fine. I will just read out the question. So for theme 1, we had 4 questions, and I'd like to start with thanking everybody for their contributions. There have been lots of suggestions and comments of very high quality, and it's clearly half an hour is not enough to kind of do them any justice. So I apologize beforehand for what I'm about to say. It's probably a caricature. But so the first question was, what are the most important unknowns in indoor-outdoor exchange? And so a lot of the comments involved emissions sources. So things like VOCs, what's generated by cooking, and so on. And the other kind of set of questions was with how do we really kind of model coupled indoor-outdoor exchange, and particularly the flow. So things like pressure coefficients. What is the consequence of simulating outdoor environments independently from indoor environments? Again, these pressure coefficients being one important one. And there was talk about the need for integrated assessments. Yeah, so looking at both air quality, energy, and including human behavior in that part. The second question was, what are the most important species the network should focus on? Well, these were PM2.5 and ultrafine particles, NO2 and VOCs, apart from and then lots of suggestions around that. One interesting suggestion was that we need to look at like certification of products. So to actually kind of have a label which says, if you buy this, this is how much it will off gas, and have that actually tested. And that is that's already being implemented in some European countries, so in France and so on. So that was an interesting suggestion. What are the practical barriers that cause poor indoor air quality, and how can the network assist to address these? Well, there is the obvious, the ceiling of the rooms. the drive to get more energy efficient buildings, which has air quality implications. The lack of perception, people not realizing that just by being there, they influence air quality. Psychology, some people, you know, who are against cars and driving are still fanatical wood burners. Again, the importance to look at the nexus between ventilation, comfort, and energy. And one important one and one interesting one was that very often or regularly one might think that data of indoor air quality is kept private simply because it doesn't look good. So there is no impetus to actually share data, and I think that's one of the big problems that our community faces, that a lot of things are only tested at design stage and not actually when it's during operation. Okay, lastly, how do we tackle the huge diversity? Do we need to limit the scope of which type of building should we consider? So there were a couple of really good suggestions, many of them. We need to take a pragmatic approach, make some general assumptions, carry out a sensitivity analysis, prioritized on the greatest health benefits. And so focus on locations where it's really important, where people spend a lot of time and are vulnerable. Focused on legacy housing rather than new build. And again, the idea to look carefully at what happens in other countries. And the suggestion was to look at how Japan deals with these issues.
Thank you very much, Martin. That's very helpful. Lots and lots of information provided for theme 1 there. So lots for us to take away. Thank you. Henry, 2 to 3 minutes, please, on theme 2 and health-centered ventilation design.
Sure.
Henry.
So again, thanks. There's been enormous participation. One of the topics sort of looked at the how do we evidence and measure the link between indoor exposure and health. And there was a suggestion that asthma sufferers to some extent monitor their indoor environments and record their attacks and potential causes of it, and some thought about maybe we could learn a bit from that and try and deploy that strategy more widely. There was a lot of talk about the co-benefits of trying to highlight these links between indoor exposure and health, and trying to highlight those more. In the healthcare industry, there's sometimes punitive effects if too many airborne infections are deemed to be occurring. Another interesting topic was on how do you go from sort of monitoring chemistry to exposure, and there was talk about the relative importance of static monitors within buildings and person wearable devices, and that linked very closely to the discussion about high quality sensors versus low cost sensors, right down to apps you can have on your phone. We had another set of discussions around providing adequate ventilation and potentially increasing ventilation and the associated costs of that. There was, in a number of conversations, a lot about the role that MVHR should play as a solution or part of it. A lot of for and a lot of against. a lot of people pointing out it's not a complete solution. One very forward-looking proposal that got me thinking was, could we, at least for sort of large buildings, think about using the Internet of Things and connectivity between devices to know when we should ventilate during the day, for example, and perhaps from which side of the building and this sort of thing. Air cleaners, the whole conversation about that attracted obviously, noise production, local cleaning, level cleaning, a lot of suggestion that there's been a lot of work done internationally, but still more knowledge and research is needed. Cleaning gas is very different to cleaning particles, obviously. I think that I could go on, but I think I've sort of used my time.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Henry. Yeah, and I think this international dimension came up in theme 1 as well. So it's really great that you picked up on that in terms of, what's been done overseas, what can we learn from places like Japan. So yeah, thank you very much, Henry. It's really helpful. Tim, theme 3 and breathing city into practice.
Okay, thanks, Malcolm. Right, so I can be quite brief. We didn't have a huge number of responses. I mean, what we did have was very high quality. I think probably what that reflects, a couple of things, is firstly, illustrates the need for the network to engage more widely with other types of users. There's probably quite a lot of people who've got very specific kind of research interest in some kind of dimensions of this. Although interesting, a lot of the things which have been raised in the other themes are relevant to this in terms of how we mandate stuff, how we regulate, and so on. And it may well be that, and in a sense, it's part of this theme, is that we probably need to come up with some solutions and some ideas before we start putting them out there. There was quite some interesting discussion around differences between design and regulation. One of the kind of questions is, has guidance become regulation? And does regulation sort of infantilize design to a certain and underpin skills? An example of that, not from a ventilation but from an energy perspective, is that people might do a lot of training and become passive house designers and use PHBP, but they can't get something through building regs unless they're just doing a SAP. So, if you might have an equivalent, someone could do a big CFD analysis of a building, but whether that passes muster in your local building control office is a different question. Part of that also leads on to a discussion about the need for post-occupancy and building performance evaluation. Again, that relates to the previous discussion about how do you monitor and assess constructed things. So I think there is something about the need to move towards verification of whatever solutions come up in practice. So yeah, post-construction verification and real-time data and sensors as part of that. Someone made a useful point, which is that, if that's going to be comprehensive, then it probably needs to be legally mandated. The most of the number of replies were around issues to do with information advice for building users and groups, particularly vulnerable groups. So I think there's, we should maybe think a little bit there about, are the particular kind of groups that we should focus on and target and try and get some direct input from. But they're the main issues. Thanks, Malcolm.
Thanks very much, Tim. Thanks very much, very kind. And finally, if I can hand over to Tongji, just to summarize very briefly what was posted, what was discussed in setting up Air Quality Repositories.
Thanks. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I only can spend 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So we don't have a big number of comments or suggestions, but these are very useful. So we raise 4 questions. So the first one is map and parameters, variables, criteria. can be set up the data portal. I think this is also linked to the theme 1, theme 2, and maybe theme 3. So one suggestion is to identify projects, data and tools relevant to the regions. I think maybe we can keep discussing on this point. And second point is data of a range of spatial scales. I think this is a really good one. And also this can include the interface between indoor and outdoor, right? Also, some people particularly mention the distance of dispersion to the source. Yeah, another point is the similarity and difference between the different regional locations. I mean, the similarity, how can you identify, how can be useful to parameterize for simple model, right? And of course, this is mentioned in theme 1, theme 2. And for the reporter and the papers, we only received 2 big questions, right? So the first one is government, charity, document reports are relevant in this area, whether is there somewhere we don't know, and whether it can be shared, right? Also like the big projects, whether it can be shared somewhere. I think it is always very important and useful, because you want to find the evidence, right? Maybe the evidence somewhere, the data is there, we don't try to use it properly. And the data sets, yeah, I'm sure there are many somewhere. And this wavetone analytic and matrix office IQ focus data are mentioned. So I think I'm going to contact them, but I think if I have more, please have a look on the online form. And this, of course, will be updated based on new suggestions. And we ask the fourth question is models, tools, right? I mean, there is a big suggestions is we have a big number of tools and models, of course, right? Of course, it's related to the regional scale, city scale, neighborhood scale, and the street indoor, outdoor interface. And then also the indoor, right? It's a small indoor or classroom or something, right? I think this also will be very interesting to group into scales. Yeah, this similar. So I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tonji. So if you'd like to stop sharing your screen.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, thank you. First of all of the theme leads, but all of the delegates, just so much information there for us to take forwards. It's really important as the network leads that we take on board and we listen to stakeholders and people working in this area. So such a rich source of information there for us to take into consideration and to continue discussing with you over the coming weeks and months.